watching Gearz, brought to you by LMC Truck. Restore, maintain, customize.
You know, one of the cool things about doing a show like this is that we get all kinds of emails from people all across the nation asking questions about their project, about new tools, about legislation, whatever. And that is great. That is what this show is all about, to get you involved. But there are some questions that we seem to get over and over. One of them has to do with the techniques involved in replacing sheet metal. We're going to deal with that a little later in the show. The other one has to do with the aftermarket. Seems like a lot of you guys want to know if buying aftermarket parts is a viable alternative to buying OEM replacement parts. Sounds like we need to take a look at that. Okay, the subject on the block today is very typical of what most people are driving out there. It's a '99 Dodge truck, so it's been around a while. And even though it's running good, it's got its share of bumps and lumps on it, and things are starting to fall off. So it is time to invest in some new parts. Case in point, my original grill has been hit by so many trees and branches over the years that all the plastic mounting points are broken off, the chrome's chipping. I mean, this thing is shot. I basically hold it on with tape. That's why I needed this brush guard to keep my grill from falling off. Now, I could go down to my local Dodge dealership and pick up one that's just as cheap and flimsy as this one, or I could go to a place like LMC Truck and see what my options really are. Let's go take a look. Now, for considerably less money than what you would spend at Dodge for a new one of these, you can go to LMC Truck and pick up an original style replacement grill. Now notice this one's a little deeper, it's more aggressive looking, it's a better looking grill. But notice the construction is all plastic, just like the original, so it's going to last about the same amount of time. Or you can step up for a few dollars more and pick up a billet grill. Now look at the difference here. You got polished billet bars, a metal housing, all the mounting points are metal, and you've got quality chrome on this thing. The difference between this aftermarket grill and that original grill aren't even in the same class. So whether you want an original look or a custom look, the OEM part comes up short every time. Just remember though, anytime that you're putting new parts on, be prepared to spend a little bit of time massaging things so they fit right. Now, headlights and taillights are a lot like grills in the fact that they get a lot of wear and tear, and eventually you're going to have to replace some of them. Now, obviously, this is my stock taillight, and this is the aftermarket taillight. Now, notice they look exactly the same. They have the same plastic construction, same metal studs and metal threads to hold them in place. So this is going to look and last like this one did, but this is cheaper. And if you go to the aftermarket, you've got options. You can upgrade into a custom taillight like this carbon fiber one. You can't get that from the dealership. All right, weather stripping, come on. There's no doubt that rubber weather stripping is one of the first things to go bad on your vehicle. And nothing makes a vehicle feel old like leaks and drafts around the windows and the doors. Fortunately, there's a lot of companies in the aftermarket that have replacement weather stripping, like this stuff from LMC Truck. Now, it doesn't matter if you need door seals or window seals or windshield or whatever, now you can get it. And once again, the quality's good and it's cheaper than going back to the dealership. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering about the big stuff, the body panels. I mean, this is the expensive stuff when you have to replace it. What does the aftermarket have to offer you here? Well, this is a small sample of some of the body panels that LMC Truck has to offer. This is the lower part of a front fender. This is the lower rear part of the bed. And of course, this is that problematic area right over the rear tires. All you have to do is put them in. Now, I know some of you guys are looking at this going, wait a minute. I mean, this is great, but these are patch panels. What if I need a whole fender or a door or a bedside? What are my options there? Let's take a look. This is one of the most significant things to happen in the aftermarket in the last few years. Complete replacement panels for later model cars and trucks. Now these don't just mount with a weld here like they did a few years ago. No, these panels actually mount just like these stock pieces do. Take a look at this. You notice you got the flange on the inside that would spot weld right to the inner bed, just like the original piece. Then of course you've got the stake pocket holes stamped right in, the gas filler neck area stamped right in. You got all the proper body lines, you got the right flange on the inside of the wheel well, and of course you got the tail light area all stamped right in. The best part is though, this panel, over $1,000 from Dodge. This one from LMC, less than half that. That is a good option to have.
And now, Tool Tech.
You know, one of the big questions that we get asked all the time is what are the best ways to weld in replacement sheet metal panels? I mean, do I need a MIG welder? Do I need a TIG welder? Do I use spot welds, butt welds? Do I lap weld things? Do I do a full seam? I mean, what's the deal? Everybody seems to be saying something different. Well, you're going to find that there are several ways to do this properly and give yourself a strong, permanent repair. But no matter what technique you use, if you don't do it right and don't match it to your application, you're going to have problems. So we're going to dig into some of these techniques, starting with where you would make your splice on a panel, because it does make a difference. Okay, on a big panel like this, you always want to try to make your splice up here close to a body line. That way it'll help minimize the warpage that can happen when you weld in the panel, no matter what kind of welder you use. Now keep in mind that a MIG weld is harder than the surrounding metal, so it's going to expand and contract at a different rate than the rest of the fender. So if you took and spliced in a panel here and brought a MIG weld right here in the middle, a long ways away from these body lines, then you painted the fender black, set it out in the sun on a hot summer day, you could look across the parking lot and see a very faint weld line appear on that fender and ruin that paint job. Then when the fender's cooled down, it would disappear. Yeah, many a body guy has driven himself crazy trying to figure out what they did wrong. Now, a TIG weld is softer and matches the surrounding metal. So you can splice anywhere using a TIG welder and you're not going to have that problem. So, is a TIG welder the best way to go? No, not necessarily. They both have their place and they both have their strengths and weaknesses. Here they are. A MIG welder is simpler, quicker, and easier to use, and is very forgiving when working with dirty or contaminated metal. It will also give you less warpage when you weld in the panel. The only real drawback is that the welds are hard and they can't really be worked with a hammer and dolly. So if you get a lot of warpage, you're going to have to fix it with body filler. Most body shops use a MIG welder to replace sheet metal. A TIG welder, on the other hand, is more expensive, it's trickier to use, it hates dirty metal, and will give you more initial warpage when you weld in the panel. But since the weld is softer, the warpage can be worked out with a hammer and dolly, provided you can get the dolly behind the panel. A TIG is usually found in fabrication shops. Okay, there are generally a couple different ways to join two panels together. One is the butt weld, where you butt two pieces together and weld them up. And the other is the lap weld, where you overlap a couple pieces and then weld them together. Now, as you can see, a lot of replacement panels come with a flange stamped right into them, so you can do a lap weld. Now, all you do is place one panel over the other, and then put spot welds a few inches apart to spread out the heat and keep your warpage down. Then you just keep going back and filling in the gaps with spot welds until you finally have a complete seam, and then you just grind it down and you're done. Now, the benefits to doing it like this is you've got a little bit of leeway in the fitment of your panels. They don't have to be perfect, so that is great for a beginner. Also, you have a little bit of strength built right into that stamped flange, and that will help keep your warpage down even more. Once again, great for beginners. Now, the drawback to doing it this way is because you have two panels, you can pretty much forget about using a hammer and dolly to work out any dents or warpage. And also, those two panels give you the potential of getting moisture up in there and causing rust. So if you're using a lap weld technique, you gotta use rust proofing, and you have got to use seam sealer to keep moisture from getting in that crack. The other technique is, of course, the butt weld. Now, it's a little tougher to do, but it gives you a cleaner result on both sides of the panel. Take a look at this. Now, the key to pulling off a successful butt weld is the fitment of the panels. It has got to be right on the money. No gaps if you're using a TIG welder. Now, if you're using a MIG welder, you're going to want just a little bit of a gap. And also, a MIG welder is better at filling holes if you happen to burn through. Now, of course, your welding technique is the same. Spot weld spaced a few inches apart to spread the heat out so you don't warp the panel. Then you just keep going back in and filling in the gaps until you finally have a full seam of weld. Once you're done welding, take a grinder and smooth the welds down. Now, I prefer to use a flap wheel here because it cuts better, runs cooler, lasts longer, and it won't gouge the metal like a hard grinding wheel. Just make sure that you take your time here, though, because you can still overheat the metal and warp it. Now, when you are doing spot welds on a seam, you're going to find that it's very easy to blow through the edge of the panel and create a hole. So a couple of tricks to help you avoid this is with a MIG welder, don't put the wire right on the crack. Instead, come just to the side of it, then hit your trigger, and as you start to weld, just roll right through the seam. That'll give you a nice spot weld. With a TIG welder, the approach is similar in that you set the tungsten just to the side of the crack, get on the power, create your puddle, and then add your filler as you slowly roll right across the seam. Now, if you do happen to blow a hole in the panel, don't just grit your teeth and get in there and try to fix that sucker right now. You're going to add too much heat. That's where most people will warp a panel. If your welds are taking more than 2 to 3 seconds, you're asking for trouble. What you want to do is move on, keep putting your spot welds in, and then after that cools down a little bit, go back and fix the hole. Hey, we're back and talking about different ways to weld in replacement sheet metal panels. Now, as you can see, I've got 2 panels here that I've welded together using 3 different techniques. They're all well marked, but if you come up here, you can't even find the weld line on any of them. There's no warpage, and there's not going to be any need to use any body filler here. Any of these repairs would be great on your project. Now, the back side shows the real difference in these techniques. This is the TIG. As you can see, you have pretty much a solid line here, and with just a little bit of grinding, you can make that completely disappear. The MIG weld, on the other hand, is a little rougher, a little more sporadic, and it'll grind down real well, but if you want that to disappear completely, you probably need to come in and do a little bit of fill welding on the back side. Now, of course, here in the center is the lap weld. A strong repair, but it's obviously there. Remember, if you're going to do a lap weld technique, you've got to use some rust proofing and then put some seam sealer around the edge here so you don't get any moisture around that crack. Now, one question that people ask is, do you ever install a panel by lapping one over the other and using spot welds as opposed to a continuous bead? Well, believe it or not, that is how your vehicle was constructed from the factory. Take a look. As you can see, we have one panel lapped over the other, held in place with spot welds. That's why a full replacement panel like this has a flange all around the outer edges so you can spot weld it to the inner structure. And there is nothing wrong with putting a panel in like that. However, if you need to splice it in mid-panel, well, just doing some spot welds and covering it with body filler ain't gonna get it. No, you need to do a continuous seam so you have a solid piece of metal using the techniques we showed you earlier. So you can see there are different ways to weld metal panels together successfully. And there's a lot more tips and tricks out there to help you do this. But the only way you're going to learn this is to get yourself a welder and get out there and start doing it. That way you're not going to have to pay somebody to do this for you.
Now, quick tip. Brought to you by E3 Spark Plugs. Born to burn.
You know, one piece of maintenance that just about anybody can do on a vehicle is replace a spark plug. But even as simple as that is, sometimes you run into a problem, like trying to get your big fat hands down into a tight area to install or take out a spark plug. Well, fortunately, there is a simple solution to this problem. You just take a piece of hose and stick it onto your spark plug, and you'll notice it'll stay right there. Then you have a flexible handle that allows you to bend around all kinds of obstacles and still thread it in there. Now, once you get it in there finger tight, you just pull on the hose, comes right off. Then you grab your socket, put it on there, give it its final tightening, and you're done. I have seen a lot of tools come out over the years to try to solve this problem, and nothing works as good as a simple piece of hose. You know, since the beginning of the automotive era, people have been fascinated with the thought of a vehicle that could transform into something else. Whether it's a hardtop into a convertible, or a car into a truck, or a street car into a race car. Matter of fact, it's that desire to transform something that inspires most gearheads to tear apart a perfectly good car or truck and build it up into something completely different. And obviously, there's a lot of examples of this way of thinking out there in the garages across the United States. But there's never been a manufacturer that has really pushed this idea like Chevy has with the new Camaro. Take a look.
Roll out.
Of course, that was all done with movie magic. I mean, none of that stuff was real. But the new Camaro is a prime candidate to do a little bit of transforming too. And that's exactly what the guys at Trent's Trick Upholstery did with this Camaro when they built it for GM to be featured at the SEMA show in Las Vegas. Let's take a look at it. The first thing to do was to get the stance where it needed to be. So a complete air suspension system was designed for the car. Then, to enhance the lower stance, 22-inch rims were bolted on, and a custom spoiler and ground effects were built to fit the car. The nose got its own makeover with custom grills and lights, and the rear end was treated to a very slick aluminum roll pan that lets you know this is not a typical Camaro that just blew by you. Since interiors are the specialty of Trent's Trick Upholstery, it's no surprise to find a huge cool factor inside this thing too. The seats were redone in two-tone leather, and a custom console and door panels were fabricated to make sure you never get tired of sitting in this thing. Of course, no car that bears the name Camaro can be slow, and Trent wasn't taking any chances there. Not with all the Mustangs and Challengers and imports that are roaming the streets. So, the first thing he did was stick a supercharger on to give this car the balls to run with the big boys. But that's not all. He also had custom panels fabricated so the car is as clean as a whistle under the hood. So clean, in fact, that he wanted to show it off. So, he grafted in a Corvette ZR1 tempered glass hood insert to tease people with a quick glimpse before disappearing in a cloud of smoke.
Bring it. Are you going to be able to keep up with me when I go by this time? Just do it faster this time, okay? If you blink, you'll miss me, man.
So what do you think? Was it a successful transformation? I think so. So does GM. The best part is, though, you can build a car like this, because now all these parts, the seat upholstery, the ground effects, that cool hood, are all available from Trent's Trick Upholstery. So now you have no reason not to transform your own Camaro into something that even Bumblebee would be proud of.
What are you working on? Brought to you by Miller Electric, the leading manufacturer of arc welding and cutting equipment for your business or home shop.
The what are you working on today comes from a 21-year-old kid whose name is Aaron Milam, and he's from Hereford, Texas. Now, Aaron came from a car-crazy family, so he always knew that he wanted a classic muscle car, so he started saving his money. And at the age of 14, he ran across a '69 Chevelle in storage, he bought it, and he and his dad started putting it together. Fortunately, his dad knew what he was doing. Now, here's a shot of the two working together in a happy moment. And then, of course, here they are in a typical car moment. But they just kept working on it. They did the suspension, they did the interior. Here's a shot of that 454 engine going back together, until finally Aaron was able to drive it to high school looking like this. Yeah. Now, of course, the Chevelle taught Aaron some things too, like the realities of owning a big block Chevelle. Now, after high school, Aaron enrolled in McPherson College, where he is now working on a 4-year bachelor's degree in automotive restoration. Now, he says his Chevelle is not just a car to him, it actually helped him choose his career path. So, Aaron, to help you on that career path, we are going to give you one of these Miller welding jackets to help keep the sparks off you. Now, I do recommend you don't leave this laying around in college, because this thing will walk off in somebody's hands. Now, the rest of you guys, we know you're working on something. Send some pictures in to StaceyDavid.com. It doesn't have to be finished, it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't even have to be a car. It just needs to be something that you are passionate about. All right, you've seen what Aaron's working on, you know what I'm working on. Now it's your turn. Get out there and work on something. We'll see you later.